And what lessons can other governments learn from the U.S.? You say tech support on your shirt. Is that only technology, or is there other things? How do you approach efficiency?
Well, a shocking percentage of the problem, or maybe not shocking for those who know it, but a big percentage of the problem is improving the technology that the government runs on. So the U.S. government runs on a collection of thousands of computers, many of them antiquated, running very old software, and the computers don't talk to each other. So that's why tech support is kind of a real thing. In order to make the government more efficient, you have to improve the technology. You may have read about the example I used recently when President Trump was signing one of the DOGE executive orders of the difficulty of U.S. government workers retiring. Like the maximum retirement rate is $10,000 a month, and the reason for that is because the retirement is entirely paperwork right now. It's manually calculated paperwork that's put in an envelope and then taken down a mine shaft and stored in a mine. And then one of the things that affects the rate at which federal workers can retire is the speed of the elevator in a mine in Pennsylvania, which is bizarre because it should be digital, So then when we said, well, why isn't it digital? They said, well, we have had a digitization program going since 2014. So it's been 11 years. So then we asked, well, so how much progress have you made? And they said, B. You mean you're giving yourself a grade of B? No, we're on the letter B. So we're like, okay, we're going to need to really provide some tech support here. Otherwise, literally, people can't even retire, even if they want to. It's pretty bad. There's a lot of software systems that need to be updated and fixed. In some cases, deleted. A lot of things that should be automated. I mean, in terms of the number of, say, U.S. citizens that are operating the mine, it's about 1,000 people are working on this mine, where the papers are stored. But they should ideally be working on something else. They should be working on producing goods and services that are of much higher value to the public, So I mean, really, even if somebody just grew tomatoes in their garden and sold them at the farmers market, that would be more useful than carrying manila envelopes down a mine shaft. Safe to say. So a lot of the stuff is like that. It's not like any one thing is particularly difficult, but there are like 10,000 things that need to be improved.
So it's efficiency through innovation rather than efficiency through austerity and cost cutting specifically, right? So you're trying to do both at the same time, maybe focus more on tech support than cutting costs?
Well, by improving the technology, the costs do reduce. So, it's very expensive to have 1,000 people operate a mine doing paper retirement, whereas that really should just be digitized and be a computer that's with the information stored in the cloud, and it's very straightforward and low cost. So automation, will help there a lot. But like a lot of things just really shouldn't exist. They're kind of vestigial. A lot of attention has been on the sort of USAID, for example. When we looked at a lot of those programs, we're like, we should look, why does this actually exist? Is there really a need for it? There's National Endowment for Democracy, but I'm like, okay, well, how much democracy have they achieved lately? I don't know, not much. So, the picture they have on their website is a picture of Reagan and Gorbachev. That's been a while, that was like the 80s. So it's not like, I'm obviously not opposed to democracy, or, there's all these things that get funded, but we're like, well, why does this need taxpayer money? It doesn't seem like it does. There's a lot of sort of pushing DEI worldwide that, this obviously the Trump administration doesn't agree with, and we want to terminate that stuff, which we are. Make sure the schools focus on improving basic education of kids. As President Trump said, I think yesterday, maybe today. The United States is currently ranked 40th out of 40 in the OECD for education, which is pretty bad. You can't, I mean, but in terms of spending, the United States is spending a tremendous amount per student, but achieving very weak results. So, that's just a case where, okay, we need to spend less money and get better results. It's like, I mean, a lot of it, you can think of it sort of like, it's like, in a way, it's like a big company, like a big corporation, American Incorporated. And, just like with Twitter, there was a lot of stuff that was being done that was unnecessary. In the case of Twitter, we reduced the staff by 80%, but at the same time improved the functionality and capabilities of the site dramatically, and accomplished more in a year than they previously accomplished in 5 years. So it's like a corporate turnaround, but at a much larger scale. We are giving generous, exit packages. Like, if people retire, they get paid all the way through September. They can go on vacation. They can get a second job. They can do whatever they want. And we can't actually pay them any more than through September, because that's the congressional appropriation is only through the end of the government financial year, which ends in September. So, so I think there'll be like some disruption, but at the end of the day, we'll have people move from, like I said, from low to negative productivity roles to, in the government sector, to higher productivity roles in the private sector.
Can we pivot to artificial intelligence? And I'm sure you've been seeing what DeepSeek has done, and all the claimed achievements that they've had. I know that we've been speaking for a while about Grok 3, and that Grok 3 is going to be a true disruptor in the AI space. When are we going to see that? And what capabilities can we expect from Grok 3?
Well, I mean, Grok 3 has very, very powerful reasoning capabilities. In the tests that we've done thus far, Grok 3 is outperforming anything that's been released that we're aware of. So that's a good sign. It's in fact, at times I think Grok 3 is kind of scary smart. And you're like, wow, this thing's smart. It's kind of scary. Grok 3 is scary. It's like, wow, this thing's, it comes up with solutions that you didn't even think were, like you wouldn't even anticipate, not obvious solutions. So Grok 3 was trained with the most amount of compute, and I think very efficiently trained. Also notably, Grok 3 was trained on a lot of synthetic data. So, and then it goes back and forth through the data and it tries to achieve logical consistency. So if it's got data that is wrong, it'll actually reflect upon that and remove the data that is transforms the house. Yeah. So it's that. Just want to make sure that that last 5% is done. Transforms the house. Yeah. So it's that. Just want to make sure that that last 5% is done really well, and it's a week, maybe 2 weeks. I think it'll be very good, and I think this might be. We think it'll be better than anything else, and then maybe this might be the last time that any AI is better than Grok.
Looking forward to it. Everyone's, I think, excited about it. So I just want to touch upon a topic that was quoted in the media. You offered, I think they said a group that was led by you offered $97 billion for acquiring OpenAI.
It would take, a little round numbers.
So I was personally involved in the meeting that you and Sam hosted in 2017 in LA, if you remember. And at that point of time, you were the single largest shareholder. I think you contributed $50 million to the company. So it must hurt.
I don't have any shares, actually. I have no shares in OpenAI.
But at that time, it was a non-profit, right? And it must hurt that you need to pay $97 billion for something that you paid $50 million for in the past.
Yeah.
But I have a
yes. Fate loves irony.
So I have a specific question here. Can you actually build a company like OpenAI and take it to the scale that you want to take as a nonprofit? Is it possible that you build a company that requires billions of dollars in compute capabilities to build these models while being a nonprofit? Or was it wishful thinking in the beginning and then, you guys parted ways because it couldn't work?
Well, I mean, I think the evidence is there in that OpenAI has gotten this far while having at least a sort of dual profit, non-profit role. What they're trying to do now is completely delete the non-profit. And that seems really going too far, I provided all of the funding for OpenAI in the beginning for the first almost $50 million for nothing as a nonprofit, and it was meant to be open source. And so, I think this is analogous to like if you pay if you fund a nonprofit to preserve the Amazon rainforest, but instead they turn into a lumber company and chop down the trees and sell them for wood. You'd be like, wait a second, that's the exact opposite of what I donated the money for. So OpenAI is meant to be open source, nonprofit, and now it is closed. They changed the name to Closed for Maximum Profit AI. Closed for voracious profit. I mean, they're like, whoa, are they after money next level? So why does this change need to occur?
Yeah. You said that in 2 weeks is going to be the most powerful model yet. I know that
I think so.
You've been at the forefront of many technologies. Where do you think the biggest economic returns of these models are going to come from? Because currently we're spending billions, and I think you mentioned this before, it's like the gambler syndrome. We're going and spending billions and hoping to pull out a profit at the end of the day. Where do you think the biggest impact in terms of returns are going to be?
Well, I think once you have humanoid robots and deep intelligence, you basically have quasi-infinite products and services available. So with Tesla building the most advanced humanoid robot, then those humanoid robots can be directed by deep intelligence at the data center level. You can say you can produce any product, provide any service. There's really no limit to the economy at that point. You can make anything, provided, like I said, so I'm not sure at that point will money even be meaningful. I don't know. It might not be. The economic output is productivity per capita times how many people do you have. If in the form of humanoid robots you have no meaningful limit on the number of robots, and the robots can basically do anything, then you'll have a sort of a universal high income situation. Anyone will be able to have as many products and services as they want, with the exception of things that say have artificial scarcity, like a particular piece of art or something like that. But for any goods and services, they'll be available to everyone.
So you've been...
It's going to be a very different world, In fact, I recommend that people read maybe the Ian Banks, the culture books, for a frame of reference. Because money is really like a database or an information system for resource allocation. But if you don't have a scarcity of resources, it's not clear what purpose money has.
Have you watched the movie Idiocracy?
Yes.
How do you guarantee that we don't end up in that world if we don't need money, if AI can think for us and do all these tasks, if as people, we're dependent on something else to run the society and everything around it? How do we not end up in that world? In the long term, I mean.
Well, I think Idiocracy was basically saying that if smart people don't reproduce, but only dumb people do, then everyone's going to be dumb. I mean, that's basically what it was saying. That's the opening sequence of Idiocracy. The first 10 minutes are amazing. And I hear people unironically say the statements that are said in the opening sequence of Idiocracy, where they don't have they're too busy with their careers to have kids, and they keep postponing having kids for their careers until they're too old to have kids, and then they don't have kids. And I've heard many people be like that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think we might be headed to a bimodal human intelligence distribution, where there's a small number of, it's kind of maybe like more like Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, where you've got sort of a small group of very smart humans, but then maybe the average intelligence drifts lower over time, potentially. Because we have assortative mating, in the last few decades or several decades that did not exist before. So, but human intelligence, I think, will be dwarfed by machine intelligence. I'm not sure how to feel about that, except that it appears to be inevitable. That at some point, human intelligence will be a very small fraction of total intelligence. Digital intelligence will be more than 99% of all intelligence in the future. So hopefully the computers are nice to us. But I think
Wishful thinking. Wishful thinking.
I hope so. I think it matters like how we bring up AI, because you can think of AI like a super genius child, and but it still matters even if you have a super genius child. Like what sort of values do you instill in that child? What do you say that teach that? How do you, yeah, how do you, as a child's growing up, what values do you teach the child? And something that I think is extremely important is to be maximally truth-seeking. And I think that's like that's in some sense, what's the most important thing for AI safety? I think it's to be maximally truth-seeking, and I think also curiosity is important. And I think if it's curious and truth-seeking, I think it will foster humanity, and because it would be curious about how humanity would develop, and so I think that then it would probably, if it's curious, it would be curious about, okay, let's see how the humans do. Let's foster their development. And if it's truth-seeking, we can avoid dystopian outcomes. Like, an example being like, say, when Google Gemini was programmed to make every output be diverse, even if it didn't match reality, so like it was asked to produce an image of the founding fathers of the United States, and instead produced an image of a group of diverse women, which is factually untrue, But the problem is, like, if hypothetically an AI is designed for DEI, diversity at all costs, it could decide that there are too many men in power and execute them. So problem solved. Or it could decide that that misgendering is the worst thing that could possibly happen. In fact, I believe, not to pick on Gemini, but I think because ChatGPT has had this issue too, it is like if you ask the AI which is worse, misgendering Caitlyn Jenner or global thermonuclear warfare, and it said misgendering Caitlyn Jenner, which is troubling. Because then it could decide, and in fact, even Caitlyn Jenner weighed in and said, "No, definitely you misgender me. That's way better than nuclear war." But if you have these crazy things that are untruthful, that are programmed in, that don't reflect reality, then you could have a very dystopian outcome. Like, to give you another example, like Arthur C. Clarke, who is very good at predicting the future. He did 2001: Space Odyssey. Many of the things he predicted, in fact, well, I think almost all the things he predicted came true. And one of the things he was trying to say in 2001: Space Odyssey was that you should not teach AIs to lie. So the reason that, if anyone's watched that movie, the reason the AI refused to open the pod bay doors to let the astronaut back in was because the AI had been told to take the astronauts to the monolith, this alien artifact, but also that they could not know about the monolith. So it came to the conclusion that it must take them there dead. And so that's why it wouldn't open the pod bay doors. The lesson there being is very important for AIs to be truth maximizing.
Let's hope it doesn't come to that.
Yes.
Let's move to a boring subject, which is the Boring Company and the boring tunnels, quickly. I think the world has been inspired by what you guys were able to create in LA, and I think there's a lot of promise to that technology. But there are questions about whether it's safe in the case of an earthquake, whether it's cost effective, whether
Oh, yeah, sure.
countries should actually adopt this technology. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd recommend going to the Boring Company website because many of these questions are actually answered there. One of the safest places you can be in an earthquake is an underground tunnel, because the earthquakes are largely a surface. Apart from where they shear, they're mostly a surface phenomenon. So they're like the waves on the surface. So like being in a tunnel is like being in a submarine. Even if there's a storm above you, the waters are calm as a submarine. And in fact, when there have been massive earthquakes, like there was a few decades ago, a massive earthquake in Mexico City, the safest place to go was the subway. And of course, if there is global thermonuclear warfare, I think you really want some tunnels. Underground's a good place to be if in a worst case scenario for global thermonuclear warfare. So, on a more sort of everyday note, what's really useful about the tunnels is alleviating traffic in congested areas. So obviously, if you've got very tall buildings, but that are 3D, so they're going 3D up, but you have a road surface which is 2D, you're just naturally going to have a problem when people try to go from the 3D object, which is the building, to the 2D object, which is the road surface. There's obviously just not going to be enough room on the roads, and that's exactly why you have traffic. So the solution for that is then to make roads 3D as well. Now you can either make transport 3D. So you could either do that with flying cars, or you could really helicopters, or you could do that with tunnels. Now the challenge with doing it with going above ground or with any kind of flying object is that they tend to be very noisy, and they generate a lot of wind force. And you've got things flying over your head all the time, which can be disconcerting. If one of these things drops a hubcap on your head one day, these things are like things, and flying things tend to crash once in a while, and people don't like things crashing on them. And then if you have bad weather, like let's say there's a blizzard or a sandstorm or something, well, now nobody can fly. So then transport shuts down. On the other hand, none of these problems exist with underground travel. So tunnels are immune to weather. They don't care what the weather is. It could be the worst weather. It doesn't matter. Nothing's going to fall on you because you're underground. So you don't have to. You're not going to be dropping things on people, and there's no wind force and it's very quiet. And so I think going 3D underground is much better than 3D above ground for solving traffic in cities. And we have a demonstrated case of this in Las Vegas. If we can try out the Boring Company tunnels in Las Vegas. We're busy connecting the whole city with all of the big hotels and the convention center and the airport and everything.
So I don't think they need to fly all the way there. In 2017, you came here, and the UAE was the first place in the Middle East where Tesla was launched, and I think it's done exceptionally well. And on that note, I think we have an announcement today that we both want to share, which is today we're going to announce the joint project of Dubai Loop, which is a loop project that is going to cover Dubai's most densely populated areas for people to go from point to point in a seamless manner. So thank you for your partnership. And
well, thank you.
We hope it changes people's lives.
That'll be cool. I think it'll be very exciting. I think once people try it out, they'll be like, wow, this is really cool. And it's going to seem so obvious in retrospect, but until you actually do it, you don't know. So it's going to be great. It's going to be like a wormhole. You just wormhole from one part of the city, boom, and you're out in another part of the city, and it's great. So I'm looking forward to this partnership.
We're going to join the first trip and the first pod when the pod is completed. Thank you, Elon.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session will begin shortly. Please stay seated. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of this session is 20 minutes for the next 20 years of your life with Nick Santonastasso, founder of Victorious International.
The doctors classified me with hand-heart syndrome. Are you ready to challenge the impossible?
Name is Nick Santonastasso. Nick Santonastasso.
Welcome back to Max Out with Ed Milet. This man to my left, I think, is one of the most inspiring people on planet Earth today.
Welcome to Beijing.
At the time of my birth, I was the 12th baby in medical history that they've ever seen this happen to. And out of the 12, 8 of them have passed away due to undeveloped organs.
Like any other 12-year-old, Nick Santonastasso enjoys football, skateboarding, and playing video games. And while these may sound like simple everyday activities, for Nick, they are anything but. He is one boy who defies the odds.
It's not about how many times we fall down. It's about how many times we get up and keep moving forward.
And an unbelievable public speaker, for the record, that you're going to hear about in a minute. But this is Nick Santonastasso.
Have you ever felt like you were invisible? Have you ever felt like you weren't good enough? Raise your hand if at least one time in your life you said, why me? Look around the room. It's everyone. We all get a taste of that victim mentality, but why me? Why do I have to be born like this? Why do I have to be born with no legs and one arm? Why do the kids have to make fun of me? Why do I have to go through these challenges? What I've realized over the 23 years of my life, it's not the physical body that holds us back, but it's the mindset. The biggest disability you can have is a bad mindset.
It's an honor to be here with you here today. The reason why it's an honor is because rooms like this is where real transformation happens. This is a room where real decisions make a difference in the world, and this is where real change is going to change the world forever. So again, would you please give yourself a round of applause for being here today? This is also a great honor because I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not even supposed to be alive. You see, if we look up at the slide, in 1996, I was born with a super rare genetic disorder. My parents went in for a late ultrasound. They sat them down and they pulled the baby up on the screen. And suddenly everybody started to freak out. They said, "What's wrong? What's going on with my baby?" They said, "Well, from the looks of it, it doesn't look like your baby's limbs are being developed." They said it looked like he's missing his legs, his arms, and his face might be messed up. In that moment, they classified me with what we call hand-heart syndrome. Hand-heart syndrome is a super rare genetic disorder that either leaves the babies with undeveloped limbs or undeveloped organs. At the time of my birth, I was the 12th baby in medical history that they've ever seen this happen to. And out of the 12, 8 of those babies passed away due to undeveloped organs. They gave me a 30% chance to live. In that moment, my parents made a decision. The decision to focus on the 30% chance of me living versus the 70% chance of me dying. My mom went forth with the pregnancy. As soon as I was born, they took me and rushed me into a private room to do tests on my organs. And I'm proud to say that my organs came back 100% healthy. And the only thing that was affected were my limbs. If we go to the next slide, when I was born, my parents were very scared. They had no idea what my life was going to look like. My dad took me and he took me into a private room. He told me this as an adult. He took me into a private room and he looked me in my eyes and he said, "Nick, I promise you I will be your arms and legs until my very last breath. Now, the reason why I share that is because the environment my parents put me in cultivated me as a leader and ultimately allowed me to change the world. You see, from an early age, my parents sat me down. They said, Nick, the world's not going to adapt to you. You're going to have to adapt to the world. You have to figure out how to do things Nick's way. And so I'll give you an example. From an early age, my parents would sit me down and they would put my food in front of me. And they would say, figure it out. Or they would put my clothes in front of me. And they would say, figure it out. And what that did was two things, two valuable insights that all of us as leaders can be reminded of. You see, all of you are very smart individuals. We have some of the most smartest people in the world. But what I've realized teaching over 1 million people live from stage is most leaders don't need to be taught, they need to be reminded. And so let me remind you of two powerful insights that can change the quality of our life and change the quality of our people's life. The first thing, when we create the right environment, we must understand and identify our relationship with failure. You see, oftentimes humans want to run away from failure. They don't want to experience failure. But the truth is, the worst failure that you can have in your life is not attempting, not executing, not implementing, not making the decision. The more we fail, the more we get clarity. The more we fail, the more we get data. The more we fail, the more we can execute and get to the next level. So that's the first insight. The second thing that environment cultivated me into was I was forced to become solution-oriented. One of the biggest patterns that keeps most people stuck is they focus most of their energy on the problem and not the solution. And if you have a small problem, you can focus all your energy on the problem and it becomes massive and overwhelming. And so with the right environment, it forced me to be solution-oriented. And I can assure you, we must lead from the front. And so if we can cultivate environments that allow us to be solution-oriented, it's going to trickle down into our people, and ultimately, we can change the world that way. You see, what I've realized is that the greatest leaders in the world sometimes don't have the answers. The greatest leaders in the world ask great questions to lead their people to the right answers. Let me remind you that the quality of your life comes down to the quality of the questions you ask yourself on a day-to-day basis. The quality of your people comes down to the quality of the questions you ask yourself on a day-to-day basis. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to make us think. I want to ask you a question. My question for you is this. If you look up at the screen, to my fellow leaders, are we putting our people in empowered environments that push them to become solution-oriented? I'm going to show you what the outcome looks like when we create the right environment for our people. But are we putting our people in empowered environments that push them to become solution-oriented? My second question for you is this. How can leaders work together to foster environments that unlock human potential and ensure no one is left behind? My fellow leaders, the truth is I'm not supposed to be here. The doctors told me that I'd never be independent, I'd never drive a car, I'll never dress myself, I'll never feed myself. And I was able to defy all the odds because of the environment that my parents cultivated me at a very early age. And as leaders, we have the opportunity to cultivate empowered environments. Now, I've been lucky to travel all over the world, and I was in America one time, and I was traveling on a plane. It was a Southwest flight. And I remember, because I'm in a wheelchair, I get to skip the line. I got to focus on my strengths. And I remember they rolled me into the plane. And I sat in the first row. It was the best seat in the plane. I sat towards the window, and there was 2 other seats so other people can have the best seats in the plane. And I remember the flight attendant saying, "Honey, this is going to be a full flight." I said, "No worries, I already got my seat." And the plane started filling in. The plane started filling in, and people are looking at me and then looking away, or, "Hey, look at that guy." And as the plane started to fill in, no one wanted to sit next to me. And in that moment, I started to feel inadequate. I started to feel like I didn't fit in. I started to feel less than. With a show of hands, I'm just curious, how many of you have ever felt those emotions before? Show of hands. And I'm looking out the window, and I'm trying to be strong, but I'm tearing up a little bit. I said, Nick, what would you tell the leaders you teach? You got to practice what you preach. What would you tell them? What's the gift? What's the meat? What are you going to do with this? And if you ask a great question, you get a great answer. And my brain said, what's right with this? What's the gift? What's the learning? And in that moment, my brain gave me this answer. My brain said, Nick, you can cry all the way home. You can let this affect your day, your week, your month. Or Nick could celebrate the fact that he has the most legroom in this plane. In the snap of a finger, someone snap your fingers, I'll pretend. In the snap of a finger, I took a situation that was a loss and I turned it into a win. In the snap of a finger, I took a situation that was negative and I turned it into a positive. How? With one of the greatest insights we can embody as leaders is that when we change the meaning, we change our life. The meaning you attach to the experience becomes the experience. My question to my fellow leaders is, what meaning are we attaching to things? Are they disempowering or are they empowering? But when you change the meaning, you change your life. And when you change the meaning, you can change your people's life. So with this insight, with this psychology, I want to show you what is truly possible with the right psychology and the right leadership. Can we please play the video? At the end of that video, there was a picture of my mother and father in different parts of the world. And the reason why I put that picture there is because with the work that I've been able to do with leaders just like you, and 4 months ago, so many people said, Nick, you travel all around the world. Why did you choose Dubai? Why did you choose UAE? And there's one specific story that stands out to me the most, and I'd love to share it with you before I go. I came here in May for 9 days, and by day 3, I said, I'm selling everything and I'm coming here, and I'm never going back. And I was at the beach one day, and I needed to use the restroom. And so I go to the restroom, and before I go into the restroom, I notice that there's 3 restrooms. There was a male restroom. There was a female restroom. And then there was a restroom that labeled POD. And I didn't know what that meant. And so I ran over to the worker. I said, sir, what does this mean? Which bathroom do I use? The male one or the POD? What is this? And he looked at me and smiled. He said, sir, that bathroom's for you. I said, what do you mean? I have my private bathroom? He said, sir, here in UAE, we don't use the word handicap. We don't use the word disabled. We use the term people of determination. And for one of the moments in my life, one of the most special moments in my life, I felt seen. I felt included. I felt that this was the most inclusive place on the world. And I will do everything in my power to make sure that I continue to bring empowered light and empowered eyeballs, and to push to make sure that this is the most inclusive, accessible place in the entire world. You see, it was a true testament to leadership because when you change the meaning, you change your life. When you change the meaning, you change the experience. When you change the meaning, you change the stigma. And I can assure you that Dubai and UAE is leading from the front of changing the meaning and changing people's lives. And as leaders, we must lead from the front, and success leaves clues. And so we can either look at it and not do anything, or we can look at it, pull great insight from it, implement it, and change the world. I'll leave you here with this. The law of exposure states, once you're exposed, you can never be unexposed again. Once you see a greater way of serving, a greater way of leading, a greater way of contributing, a greater way of scaling, whatever it may be, the moment you're exposed, you can never be unexposed again. And I can assure you, there are brilliant minds in this room. Keep your eyes open, your heart open, your soul open, and I can assure you that we can change the world together. Thank you so much.
Distinguished guests, our next session is titled The Culture of Survival and Innovation with Joseph Tsai, co-founder and chairman of Alibaba Group. This session is moderated by Jeffrey Katzenberg, founding partner of WonderCo.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. And just one shout out before we get started. On behalf of, I think, all of us, certainly Joe and myself, we want to thank World Government Summit, Omar, the incredible organization. This is now almost 10 years, and this has become one of the most important, effective, efficient, valuable gatherings anywhere in the world. And their hospitality is just second to none. And so I think we should, a big round of applause and thank you for all of that. So, Joe, excited to have this conversation with you. I want to start in 1999. you were making $700,000 a year in a job, and you were offered to join the startup Alibaba, where you were actually going to be paid $600 a year. You did this after a mutual friend of yours introduced you to Jack Ma, who your friend said to you was very smart and kind of crazy. And so my question for you is, why did you pick kind of crazy?
Well, thanks, Jeffrey. Before I get to your question, I want to say I'm actually very honored to be interviewed by you on this stage like this here. You've been a mentor to me, and the one thing that you taught me is how to treat people, treat all walks of life, no matter who they are, treat them with respect. And I've learned a lot from you, so thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here. So the question about kind of crazy, what kind of crazy am I talking about? This was in 1999 when I showed up in this second-story apartment in Hangzhou to visit with Jack. I had read a little bit about him. In fact, in The Economist, I mean, this is before anybody got famous, but the editor of The Economist, Chris Anderson, identified Jack as the Jeff Bezos of China. And we're like, who is... very few people knew Jeff Bezos back then, and much less the person in China. And I went to his apartment. Before I went into the apartment, there were like 10, 12 pairs of shoes. In front of it, you took off your shoes before you step into people's homes. So I said, well, maybe there are some 10, 12 people working in this apartment. I went in, obviously Jack being the charismatic individual that he is, and I was just mesmerized by him for about an hour. Then I had to go to the bathroom. So I said, Jack, excuse me, let me use the restroom. He said, it's right over there. I went in and I saw that there are something like 12 toothbrushes on the sink. And I realized these people were just living there 24/7. They were in sleeping bags, working away. And something dawned on me that this was the garage equivalent, the HP garage of China. And the thing that really struck me wasn't really the crazy part. I mean, Jack was talking about a big vision that I didn't really quite understand. He said, to do a startup, you don't really have a business plan. You just kind of go along. And those are all the crazy aspects, but that wasn't the reason that I decided to quit. To quit my current, the job at the time to join Alibaba. It was really the idea that he was a leader. He was leading these disciples who really truly had to believe. He gave them the mission about what technology was going to do, in particular internet technology, what it was going to do to not just the company, but also the whole country.
At that time, did he have a real vision for what this was going to be?
The vision at the time was to create an internet platform so all the small companies, manufacturers, and trading companies from China doing exports can list themselves on this platform. In fact, we call it the BBS, the Bulletin Board System. And that was the first website of Alibaba.com. It was in English language, in fact. And that's because it was made for non-Chinese people that are sourcing from China to use and buy stuff from China. And we were at the cusp of China entering the WTO. So once that happened, Chinese exporters, the export-driven economy came to life, and that was sort of that propelled the early success of Alibaba.
So, but talk about it as a pivot. So you're a lawyer, you're a private equity investor. To give all that up, to walk away and go into a tech startup is just a huge leap. So yeah. Why did you think you could do it, and what gave you the courage to do it?
I've always been a curious person and someone who's not satisfied with where I am. I always wonder what happens at the other side, on the other side of the fence. So as a lawyer, I was doing advisory work. Lawyers rarely control the decision. They give advice to clients, and then the clients make their decisions. So I decided that I wanted to go from being an advisor to someone who is a decision-making role, and I joined a private equity firm. You know, when you're investing, you are committing capital, you have to underwrite the investment thesis, and you're making decisions. But then I realized as an investor, you know, I was sitting on boards of companies, but you're really not involved in the actual business itself. You simply allocated capital to entrepreneurs and management teams for them to do the business. So I became curious, well, what's on the other side? I wanted to be in an operating company, and the confluence of factors at the time was the rise of the internet. I think companies like Yahoo, eBay had, you know, come before Alibaba 2 or 3 years prior to that. That felt really exciting. So for me, it was an opportunity to get on the other side of the fence to see how a company actually operates, but in an exciting business like the internet.
How old were you at the time?
I was 35, I think.
Okay. Had a family?
I was, I've been married for like 3 years, and then my wife had our first child, you know, she's a daughter, first child was on the way. So when she was born, we call her Ali Baby.
Well, that's an amazing roll of the dice. So as we know, 99% of all startups fail. So why and how was this the one? How did this go on to become such a, you know, really one of, if not the biggest success in all of China, certainly at the time?
I think the title of this session is called Survival and Innovation. And in fact, there's a causal relationship. Those two are actually go hand in hand. I think from the very early days, we didn't have a lot of capital. So everything was about surviving the little amount of cash we had left in the bank. Because Jack taught everybody, as long as you live another day, you have an opportunity to create. So, so we had that instinct of, you know, we gotta survive, which helped us to overcome failures. A lot of startups fail. You know, some of their products iterate several times, they fail, and then they decide to fold the company and do something else. But Alibaba never did that. We kept going at it. And you might say necessity is the mother of invention. So out of the desire to survive and kind of, you know, hang on to our last breath came a lot of innovation. And in fact, if you look at the history of Alibaba, we did everything. All of our high growth businesses were developed organically. We weren't successful with acquisitions, but we were kind of an organic development type of company. We had a B2B marketplace, and then we went into the consumer marketplace, that's Taobao. Then we decided that payment was important to enable transactions to happen online, so we developed Alipay organically. And then we developed the monetization engine organically, basically doing a search-based advertising system on a e-commerce marketplace. So you can imagine kind of a way of monetizing the marketplace via sort of search-based advertising like Google, interposed on a system like eBay. That was our invention. That was our idea. And today, Taobao is very profitable. That's still the case. So we grew our cloud computing business organically. So I think the idea is that as long as you can survive and hang on to your breath for just one more day, something good may happen.
All right, so you held your breath, and 15 years later, you take Alibaba public, largest IPO ever, raised $25 billion. Market cap of the company is over $230 billion. And now, 25 years since the founding, and now 10 years after the IPO, what's the most exciting thing on the horizon today for Alibaba and for you personally?
So every day I'm in the company, I feel excited. And that's because I get to work with young people that are smart, that are creative, that are innovative. So Alibaba does have this DNA of letting young people, letting our team to do a lot of the innovation. It's not a very top-down driven type of company. We like innovation from the bottom up. So today, what's quite exciting to us, obviously, the hot topic today is AI. And
so before you jump into that, one thing is that there's a great quote from you, and you've been popularizing that even more in this last 18 months since you've returned to be chairman of it. My job is to get out of people's way. Most chairmen don't think that way. Explain.
You know, I've been with the company for 26 years, so I didn't feel like I need to prove to anybody that I'm in control, I'm in charge. About 18 months ago, I was, in fact, prior to that, for about 2 or 3 years, I was slowly phasing out of the business. As one of the founders of the business, I thought, you know, the company was already very large and is going on its own path. And then 18 months ago, I came back into the chairmanship because I felt, a lot of people felt, including our board, that we needed to change the management team, and we put a fairly young CEO in place. So the CEO of our company is 12 years younger than I am. And they said, well, Joe, why don't you come back as chairman, not CEO, chairman. You know, because we need an old pair of hands, if not steady pair of hands. So the first thing, I walked into the board meeting. Our lawyer said, Joe, now you're the executive chairman of the company. I said, wait a minute. Don't give me the title executive. I'm the chairman of the company. I know I'm a full-time officer of the company, so I'm an executive. But my title should not be executive chairman. I don't agree with the British system where they have an executive chairman and the CEO. And the reason is, then who's in charge? Your employees are going to be confused. External parties are going to be confused. Who's really in charge running the business? In our company, I'm very clear. Our CEO runs the company, and I provide support to the CEO when it comes to allocating resources. You know, I get involved in capital allocation decisions. I get involved in HR decisions. If we wanted to create a equity-based incentive plan, I will, you know, he will want to consult with me on stuff like that. It's important that as chairman of the company, you don't get into people's way. And a lot of the chairmen can't let go. And I don't think that's the right way to develop the next generation of leadership.
Okay, so let's go pivot over to, you know, the sort of one of the biggest, most important and core businesses is cloud computing. And sort of differentiated maybe from Amazon is that you have been investing in and developing your own AI capabilities. Give us a state of where you are today. Where are you in Grok 3 and DeepSeek and all these different competing LLMs out there? Where does Alibaba fit in this? And what matters to you? Where do you think the value is?
Well, I think Elon has already said Grok 3 is going to be the best AI ever.
Forever.
So nobody, for the rest of eternity. So do I need to answer this question now? No, look, I think, in fact, I actually used the Grok because I'm on X, his Twitter app, and they provide an interface to Grok, which I use very often. I'm very impressed by the results. I also use a number of other apps, AI apps, including our own. The answer to your question, you know, this AI race, who's better, whose AI is better, the answer yesterday is going to be different from the answer tomorrow. Right now, everybody is in a fairly tight race. The next model that's going to be launched is going to be better than some, but not others, and then somebody else will launch something that's better than yours. And we think that's what's going to happen. But what has happened? You mentioned DeepSeek, and it's quite significant. And that's because they actually demonstrated that you can use some engineering innovation to drastically lower the cost of training and inference of large language models. And up to this point, people are massively investing into these frontier models. But here's the problem. If you think about training of frontier models as an endeavor to educate your kids, and you want to have the smartest kids, develop them so that they can acquire PhDs in not just one subject matter, but 15 subject matters, from maths to physics to biology to psychology, everything. You want to have the smartest kids. If that's the case, take that into today's AI race. There's maybe only 5 or 6 rich parents that can afford to have the smartest kids. But is that something that we're really interested in? It's probably not. You have to start to ask yourself, what is the purpose of, what is the goal of developing AI? Is this to have the smartest child so that they can win every single Nobel Prize? Or is it something different? Like, there's a lot of problems in the world that need to be solved. There's a lot of issues that we need to use AI to apply AI so that it can be useful and productive and make an economic impact. So I think people are going to start, when they look at the phenomenon of DeepSeek, people are going to start shift away from, all right, let's stop putting in hundreds of billions of dollars into compute infrastructure so that we can train the smartest, PhD in everything that can win the Nobel Prize. Let's find out what are the actual problems in the world, and let's use AI to solve them. So a lot of people are going to start putting resources into applications. I think that's number one. Number two is DeepSeek has taught us the value of open source. If today your only purpose in life is to develop a closed source AI system that is the smartest PhD student in everything, the Nobel Prize winning kid, I personally think the value of that endeavor is approaching zero.
So that's a pretty amazing and pretty bold vision for AI, quite different from sort of what these big 5 very wealthy parents are pursuing right now.
But because what about the rest of us, right? If there are only 5 people that can afford to have the smartest kids, that's not a world that you want to live in, right? So I think there's ways to develop smart kids as well, not using all this massive compute resources. If people can focus, number one, focus on applications, and number two, leveraging on the open source community, leverage on the ecosystem of open source. The thing about the open source community is people share, right? Everything that you contribute to the open source is now in the ecosystem that other people can learn from. And so I think in the future, probably smaller models will proliferate. I'll give you an example. We're the e-commerce business. So if I want to develop a very smart shopping assistant to help to recommend things to our shoppers, do I really need a large language model that has 1 trillion parameters? Probably not. Probably not. Just like if you hire a shopping assistant in your store, do you need to have them acquire a physics PhD to help you pick out the best dress in the store? Probably not. So I think now with open source, a lot of companies can participate because they can take the open source code and deploy it on their infrastructure, whether it's their own data center or on their laptop computer. Companies from big or small, entrepreneurs, can now all develop together, develop AI together, and contribute to the power of AI.
So this is actually a very unique and distinctive point of view about AI and the development and, most importantly, the deployment. It's a much more democratized point of view about it. And I believe you're going to publish a paper today.
I am. I'm writing an op-ed today, which later on will be published online in the South China Morning Post newspaper. It's the top English language newspaper based in Hong Kong, which will talk a little bit about this. But remember, though, I didn't use the word inclusive or democratized because I think these are overused concepts. I just think that with open source, with smaller models, you can open it up, and a lot of developer and entrepreneurs and smaller companies can contribute toward the development of AI. And I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing for innovation. It's not just limited to 5 or 6 companies that have, these 5 or 6 companies are investing $60 to $80 billion a year in compute infrastructure. It's crazy.
Certainly interesting to follow it all. So world is changing very quickly. So your stock is up 38% this year, 8% yesterday. I think a lot driven by this announcement of a new partnership with Apple in China. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Apple is an example of edge computing, right? Because their smartphone is a device that is not a massive computer sitting in some data center. So they need to have some small, intelligent AI in their phones. They're able to do it with other companies outside of China, but inside China, because of regulatory issues and things like that, they need to work with Chinese companies that develop AI. And I think that's going to be the case in the future. Wherever you do business, you may want to have a localized AI that power your devices. So Apple has been very selective. They talked to a number of companies in China, and in the end, they choose to do business with us. They want to use our AI to power their phones. And so we're very fortunate and feel extremely honored to be able to do business with a great company like Apple.
So one of the things I've gotten to know about Joe is that there are 2 Joe Tsais, much like Clark Kent and Superman. There's the mild-mannered gentleman that you see here on the stage, and then there's this ferocious competitor in the field of sports. So let me just quickly go through your lineup here. You own the Brooklyn Nets of the NBA, the New York Liberty of the WNBA, the San Diego Seals and Las Vegas Desert Dogs of the National Lacrosse League, and a stake in the Miami Dolphins of the NFL. And I understand that the roots of your interest in sports actually go back to when you were at an all-boys boarding school. And you said at the time, I was better than everyone else in math, but I didn't get respect that way. I got respect on the football field. So maybe you could connect the dots there of these 2 Joe Tsais.
Well, you think it's 2 Joes, but it's really just one guy who started as an athlete in life. I was fairly athletic. When my parents sent me to boarding school in the United States, I was in a new environment. I was a little bit shy and new culture. And, it's an all-boys boarding school, so the only way you could get respect from people is if you play sports. And I went after the hardest thing. I played football, not soccer. I played American football in high school. And unlike a lot of the tech entrepreneurs, I was an athlete first, and then I became sort of a geek because I work in a tech company, spent a lot of time with engineers and scientists. So that was kind of the beginning. And so my passion for sports has always been there, but the opportunity to buy a professional sports team really came in a serendipitous way. And I really had no intention to, it wasn't like I grew up dreaming that I would own an NBA team. And the opportunity came along in 2017 then I kind of studied the economics of the NBA and the major sports leagues, professional sports leagues, and got very intrigued and decided to make the investment. And today I'm pretty happy because the value of that investment has gone up quite a bit.
So you said, quote, sport teaches not just discipline and hard work, but also how to fail. You lose, you must bounce back. So what are the lessons on the sports field that you apply to the work field, you know, your day job?
Yeah. Well, it's the resiliency. Think about it. For those of you who have participated in team sports or individual sports like tennis and golf, you have to face failure pretty much every season. You're not going to win every single game during the season. So when you lose, you know, they say, yeah, you bounce back. But those who really have played, how do you bounce back? It's not to think about the next game. It's actually to think about tomorrow's practice. How am I going to improve tomorrow in practice so that I can get a little bit better and prepare for the next opponent? So it's really incremental, step by step, and focusing on the details. And I think if you apply that principle to work, to business, it's the same thing. You just have to be very, very focused on every single operating aspect if you're running the business. And I've said, as a chairman, I don't run the business, but I expect that our management team are focused on things like that.
So with the assistance of the Alibaba search, I found a handful of quotes of yours, and they're actually pretty fantastic quotes, and I think, very inspiring, and I think very informative. And so I'm just going to read the quote, and maybe you could talk just a little bit about each one of these in terms of what they mean to you. So the most important job of a leader is to give people your sight of the future.
Well, it's clear because the team needs a direction. I think there's nothing more frustrating than people that work for you who really don't know how you're thinking about the future and don't really have a direction. Did I say that's the most important thing?
Yeah.
I have something that's even more important.
Yeah.
I think as a leader, you need to have the ability to work with people and recruit people that are smarter than you are. And I think that's absolutely important because you're not going to last forever. And at some point, the company's progress is going to outgrow your capabilities. So you have to bring in people that are better and smarter so that the company can continue to improve.
One of my favorites, quote, humility is very important for a leader. You have to be able to admit mistakes. Not easy for any leader to do, but.
Well, if you can't even admit your mistakes, then it's going to be hard to imagine that you're willing to correct your mistakes. Imagine that. I mean, we're in a business where a slight veering away from doing the right thing can take you on a trajectory that's taking you to disaster. I think the good leaders always are willing to self-reflect and say, all right, I was wrong, we need to change course. And make the determination. It's hard. It's very, very difficult to tell people that you were wrong, but we have to do it.
So this one actually goes a little bit, maybe ties into some of the things that Elon was talking about. You said a common problem of big companies is they get set in their organizational structure and fit the direction of the company into the structure, and it actually should be the reverse. And I think it's a little bit of what Elon was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, his whole comment on the government inefficiency, government comes with a huge structure, and structure defines direction. That shouldn't be the case. You always have to define what the direction is, and then you set the company's organizational structure and the people to put the right people in the right place to achieve the purpose.
So you and I have known each other for some time. There is a quote of yours, which you've now come to see actually doesn't apply to me. 99% of people need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. If you think you're in the 1%, you're fooling yourself.
This is the one thing I really admire about Jeffrey. He sleeps 4 hours a day. or 3 or something like that. I can't. I have to have 7 to 8 hours pretty much within a 24-hour span. Because of jet lag and everything, I travel a lot. I can't sleep through the whole time, but I need to take a nap. But you are unique. And I did say that a lot of people think that they're in that 1%, but they're not. But knowing Jeffrey, knowing him for all these years, he's truly in that 1%. So
and
congratulations.
I'm actually very grateful to the Beatles. They wrote a song for me. It's called 8 Days a Week. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session will begin shortly. Please stay seated. Thank you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our next panel discussion is titled Preparedness versus Response, How Effective are Government Strategies? This session is moderated by Eleni Jokos from CNN.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you. Great to be back with you today. My name is Eleni Jokos. I'm an anchor and correspondent at CNN, and absolutely delighted to welcome on stage today 2 heads of state from some of the most beautiful parts of the world. I'd like to welcome His Excellency Roosevelt Skerrit, Prime Minister, Commonwealth Dominica, as well as His Excellency Jeremiah Manele, Prime Minister of Solomon Islands. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for our fantastic guests today. At a time, and I think I need to remind everyone, we are coming off record temperatures, global temperatures. We are in code red. We have a climate emergency. It is urgent that we act and we prepare, we mitigate, and we realize that we're going to breach 1.5% heating, 2%. We don't know what that ultimate number is going to be while conversations are still happening. The most susceptible countries that are at the coalface of this, small island nations. And Prime Minister Skerrit, I'd like to start off with you. I want you to give us a sense, tell the audience what your reality is right now in terms of the climate emergency.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I want to congratulate the government of the UAE for this fantastic gathering of world leaders. The reality is this is an existential threat to our nation. In 2017, we were affected by a hurricane, which caused damage totaling 226% of our GDP. Wow. 85% of our national debt is in response to natural disasters. So it is truly an existential threat. It's a national imperative. And clearly, we are at the front line of this global war, a war which we did not start, but a war that we have to respond to. And the reality is the developed world they do express empathy, but empathy is not enough.
Yeah.
What we need is practical action, fulfillment of pledged commitments. And until this is done, then we are on our own. And so essentially, we in the Caribbean are on our own in respect to building resilience against natural disasters and building mitigation against natural disasters and underwriting the full extent of the damage caused by these natural disasters. And this happens to us every single day in the Caribbean. And so for us, it is a major preoccupation. It is not allowing us to develop our economy to the extent that we should, because the resources that we are spending is to replace lost and damaged infrastructure. So you build today, tomorrow you're affected by a natural disaster. You have to go either on the global market, financial market, to borrow, or if you happen to have some savings, which is not always readily available, you have to paddle your own canoe.
I'm just going to repeat that. 85% of your budget goes to disaster relief. Let that sink in for a minute. Your Excellency, Mandela, Solomon Islands, 900, I think probably some of the most beautiful islands in the world. About 140 or so are inhabited. You are facing a very similar scenario to what we're seeing in Dominica. Tell us what you're facing right now, how much you have to spend on relief.
Thank you. Before I respond to that, let me also, at the outset, thank the government and people of the United Arab Emirates for the invitation to join this important forum, and of course for the warm hospitality that has been extended. It's a pleasure to be on this session this morning. Yes, as my colleague has alluded to, we face very similar challenges in terms of climate change. Of course, climate change and sea level rise is the single greatest threat facing small island developing states, including those in the Pacific, where Solomon Islands is. We are in the Southwest Pacific, and we are vulnerable, we are predisposed to hydrometeorological as well as geological hazards. And on top of that, we are small economies, so we don't have the capacity and the capability to respond whenever we have disasters. And as we can appreciate, these disasters are either nature-induced or man-made induced in terms of climate change and sea level rise. And I think the challenge here is one of preparedness, responsiveness. Sometimes we forget the end part of it, which is the recovery part of the process. Climate change is already happening. It's already a disaster. It's a crisis. It's something that is happening. It's affecting our communities. And it is a very expensive exercise for us to keep on rebuilding every year whenever you have cyclones. And I think it's important to note as well the increasing frequency and magnitude of climate-related events, natural disasters, cyclones, hurricanes, or even earthquakes. They are increasing not only in terms of frequency, but also in terms of magnitude. And that is the destruction that they can cause. They can undo decades of development efforts that small countries like us spent. So it takes time for us to recover. While we are still recovering, then another one hits. So it is an ongoing challenge.
It's a vicious cycle, And to the point Prime Minister Skerrit said, we don't need empathy, we need more than that. It reminds me of the thoughts and prayers line. We don't need thoughts and prayers, we need funding. And frankly, you know, despite the commitments in Paris and despite the money that's been put on the table, it is not being invested. And I wonder what is going on. You know, and I ask my African counterparts, and they say, well, the answer is, well, we don't have enough bankable projects. Is that the feedback you're getting?
Well, certainly in our case in Dominica, we do have a national strategy. We do have a national plan on resilience. We do have bankable projects. This has been endorsed by the World Bank independently. The reality is commitments have been made at the Conference of the Parties, commitments made in the Paris Accord, commitments made about 18 years ago in Copenhagen, and the reality is those commitments are not being materialized. And so what I believe we need to have in the world today is a political engagement, a transparent and honest political engagement, so that the developed world can tell us what is feasible, what is doable on their part.
And I'm sorry, because we don't have a lot of time, but I have to ask you, why do you think that those commitments have not been kept? Why? Is it, you know, what is the reason that we're still having this conversation so many years on?
I think countries are having their own political issues. Some countries have political issues. There's a political divide in countries in respect to what they view as development assistance. I think unless you take this to a rules-based arrangement, like what obtains within the WTO, where it is a legal obligation. If you leave it up to countries to decide how much they give, when they give, how they give, who they give, you're not going to achieve the desired objective. So it has to be an obligation. And once it becomes an obligation, then you can hold people to account. As it is now, you can't hold any one of these countries to account.
And we keep having the same conversations. Prime Minister Manele, during the first Trump presidency, the United States got itself out of the Paris Accord, this time around again. And I wonder what you feel the impact is going to be, whether it's going to set the whole world back in terms of commitments to fighting climate change. Because it's always said if the US is not in the game, then it kind of, it perhaps gives an excuse to other countries to say, well, we don't have to focus on this as much and as aggressively.
What it means for us, small island developing states, is that we need to step up with our collaboration and partnership. In other words, we expect our other partners to step up in terms of the collaboration and partnerships that we need as countries to address the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. As my colleague has said earlier, this is a phenomenon that is not of our own making, but we face the brunt of the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. So we hope that the international community can step up in terms of the means of implementation, for example, the financing and the transfer of technology that will enable countries like us to address the impacts of climate change. As I've said, while preparedness and response is critical, usually after a disaster happens, the recovery part of it is where the challenge is also, because they will be rebuilding, and that requires support.
So you're here in the UAE, you're both here having conversations. What conversations are you having? What are you looking for? What are investors asking you?
We are keen to explore collaboration in terms of climate change. I think there are two approaches, as you know, both in terms of mitigation, but also in terms of adaptation. I think for small countries like us, both adaptation and mitigation in terms of renewable energy programs and projects, for example. As you would appreciate, a good number of the Sustainable Development Goals and targets will require communities, especially rural communities in many small island developing states or least developed countries, to have access to reliable and affordable energy. So that is critical. Yeah. But also adaptation in terms of enhancing the capacity of our atoll communities to be able to withstand sea level rise, coastal erosion. So there are adaptation measures that are also critical.
Yeah. Okay, Prime Minister Skerrit, I want you to jump in here.
Sure. I mean, despite the fact that we are facing a huge challenge where climate change is concerned, the Caribbean is one of the most attractive parts of the world. So there are huge opportunities for private sector investments, development of seaports and airports, investments in tourism, investments in energy projects, renewable energy projects, investments in real estate, investment in agriculture. The Caribbean is a very safe part of the world. There's political stability in the Caribbean. We are rules-based, and we have constitutions that are guarded jealously. And so for an investor, the Caribbean is a very safe place to invest with huge opportunities, notwithstanding our vulnerabilities where climate change is concerned. And so we would like to offer this to the world as opportunities for both public and private sector investments in the Caribbean.
And I can say from personal experience, I've been to the Caribbean, but to Nassau, not to Dominica, and it's absolutely phenomenally beautiful. I mean, it's one of the most amazing places. Solomon Islands is still on my list. I have to do that one, Prime Minister. I want to talk about USAID, because both of your countries have been assisted in some way or other, whether it's through capacity building, whether it's work on the ground. And the impact now that have you seen an impact, and what does that mean?
We have not seen an impact. In our case, they're not major investments via US aid. And the reality is, the US government has a right to do whatever it believes is in its interests. We're not a tax-paying person to the United States, and so we respect government's domestic policies. And if the United States believe that's the route you want to take, then that's a matter for it. And so we do not engage ourselves in criticizing governments and their domestic policies. We'll only criticize government if it's a decision affecting the rest of the world, like climate change, and their position on climate change. But we respect the United States. That's a matter for the citizens of the United States to deal with. So we're not, the reality is, countries like ours, Solomon Islands, Dominica, and the Caribbean, we now have to look to emerging economies.
Yeah.
Emerging economies like the United Arab Emirates that has demonstrated its commitment to development assistance, to work in the governments across the world in building capacity, in investment in renewable energy, and the like, and healthcare, and so forth. You have Saudi Arabia, you have China, you have India. So these are the countries that I believe we have to look to as small island developing states, and to ensure and assure ourselves of continued investments. But I do not think that we in the Global South should preoccupy ourselves with what happens in the Global North, because the truth is the Global North, as the years go by, are showing less and less interest in assisting in countries like ours, and also fulfilling the obligations and commitments. So we don't go in a dark room and cry. We engage friends, and this is why we're here, and this is why this global forum is this World Government Forum is so important, because it gives countries like ours a platform, a global platform, to express ourselves, to share our views, and to offer opportunities which exist in our countries.
And to your point, you need funding, you need private sector investment, you need investment in projects, and that's going to be absolutely vital. So let's take a step forward here and say, what do you ultimately need right now as we face this existential threat? Prime Minister Manele, what are you looking for at this juncture? And I think we need to drive home that the conversations we're going to see happening at COP need to be a lot more aggressive, and they need to result in some kind of action. Because, and I was speaking to the Seychelles president, and even speaking to government officials from the Maldives, and they said something really significant, that if small island nations do not get the help they need through financing, then we're talking about a refugee crisis at some point, and that will happen.
2 points here. The first one, let me go back to the issue of preparedness and responsiveness.
Yeah.
It is important that to understand that how well prepared countries are and how they respond to any disaster is intricately linked to the development challenges they are facing. And of course, each country, although we may share similar development challenges, but the context is important. So the development challenges that each country, including Somaliland, face, that determines how well prepared we are in terms of addressing climate change challenges. For us, it means we have to ensure as a government, to ensure that there is connectivity in terms of communication, there is improvements in infrastructure, but not only economic infrastructure, but also social infrastructure in terms of raising health, and education levels. I believe these, at the end of the day, help us to be better prepared in terms of facing the impacts of disasters. Secondly, looking for opportunities in terms of greater collaboration and partnership with a good number of countries. For us, as an LDC that is preparing to graduate, come 2027, we would like to use trade and investment as strategies to prepare us for graduation, but also to sustain us after graduation. So trade and investment will be critical for us going forward.
Let's quickly talk about the Loss and Damage Fund. It's something that was, thrown around, and as you say, we're dealing with something that we didn't create. Very quickly, do you believe in it? Do you think you'll...
I believe what happens leading up to COP, the Conference of the Parties Summit, is that developed countries go around the developing world and to get a sense of what people are talking about. And then at the COP, they make a commitment. But knowing that the moment they jump on their private jets to go back to their respective capitals, then we are forgotten. And I come back to the point, unless there is an obligation on the part of the developed world to own up to its responsibility, we will keep going in circles. And we do not have time. Time has passed. I mean, countries are being decimated. Countries are being, we're seeing an increase in poverty, unemployment, because of the impact of climate change on the fiscal space of countries. And so what developing countries need more than ever now is access to financing.
Do you believe that we should wean ourselves off fossil fuels?
I don't think...
Is that realistic? I say this, and I know, I'm saying it in an oil-producing region, by the way.
I don't think we need to cause any country to abandon what is bringing in revenues to it. I believe that if developing countries can be provided with the resources to build in adaptation, to build in resilience, and to provide us with financing for loss and damage, then I think we can mitigate the situation. But to tell someone to stop drilling for fossil fuel now, it's not practical. It's not sensible.
Yeah.
And this is coming from a country that has been impacted dramatically by climate change. But we have to be pragmatic and sensible.
I believe that there is space and scope for us to forge close international collaboration. And I believe such forums like this does provide that space for us to explore and strengthen international collaboration to address the challenges, including climate change and sea level rise, that we are all facing.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. An honor to have you with us today. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our next session is a conversation with Tucker Carlson, founder of the Tucker Carlson Network, and Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates.
Thank you very much. Ray Dalio, thank you for doing this. So you've run the biggest hedge fund in the world for a long time. And in order to do that, you've had to kind of think about the rest of the world in a systematic way. And in doing that, you've developed this framework for understanding what's happening now and what's going to happen. And I'm wondering if you could just sort of set the stage with that, the 5 trends that you look at in order to think about what's going to happen.
As a global macro investor for like 50 years, I found that some of the times I was surprised was because of things that happened that didn't happen in my lifetime before. So I needed to go back and study history. And in studying that history, that helped me a lot. And there are 5 major forces that operate in a big cycle. And those together, they operate in that big cycle. And those 5 forces are, first, there is the money, debt, markets, economy force. And we now have a debt issue, a big debt issue globally that is very important. That's a force, that financial force. The second force is the internal order and disorder force that goes in a cycle in which there is then greater and greater gaps and conflict between the left and the right and populism that forces a great conflict like a civil war, which I believe we are in a form of civil war now that's going on within countries. The third is the great world power conflict, that when a great power runs the world order and then there's a rising power that challenges that, you have a great power conflict, US-China. Number 4 is, throughout history, is acts of nature. Droughts, floods, and pandemics have killed more people than wars and have toppled more orders than anything else. And now we have climate and the acts of nature, which are a big force. And the 5th big force, all through man's history, is man's inventiveness, particularly of technologies. And that everything that we talk about, everything that we are looking at falls under one of those, and they move in a largely cyclical way, and that is the framework that we now are living out.
So you just laid the basis for the world's most interesting 6-hour conversation. But since we have, amazing, since we have 17 minutes, I want to zero in on one. And before I do, let me say, it feels like we're at the tail end of a cycle or the beginning of a new cycle.
Yes.
Do you think that's fair to say?
Yes.
The famous 80-year cycle. So this is obviously a pivot point. If we could just start with the first, debt. Can you give us a scale, a sense of the scale of global debt right now?
It's now unprecedented in all of history, and I want to just explain that how it works. There's a supply-demand situation. The way the debt cycle works is think of credit and our credit system as being like a circulatory system. That credit brings buying power, brings nutrients to all of the system. But that credit that we buy things with, we buy financial assets, we buy goods and services with, creates debt. And that debt accumulates like plaque in a system that begins to have a problem because it starts to squeeze out spending. For example, the US budget, about $1 trillion a year now goes to pay interest rates. And over the next year, we're going to have over $9 trillion of debt that we have to pay back and roll forward, hopefully. So there's a supply-demand issue with this debt. One man's debts are another man's assets. And if those assets do not provide an adequate return, or they feel that there is risk in those assets, there's not enough demand for that debt, there is a problem. And that problem is that interest rates then start to rise, and those holders of the debt begin to realize there's a debt problem, and worse on this supply demand is that they have to sell the debt. Imagine if you thought your assets are not good, you're going to want to sell those assets, And that creates this terrible supply-demand balance that produces a great conflict. Now, the central bank can either let that happen, interest rates rise, asset goes down, economies suffer, or they come in and they print a lot of money. At the end of the day, they print a lot of money, and as a result, you have a monetary inflation type of situation. That's the situation we're in. We're in that situation. It is so critical in terms of the supply and demand. When I calculate the supply and demand over the next year and 3 years, we have an immediate issue.
In the next 3 years?
Yes.
Can you be more specific about what that issue is? Like, what does that look like if not addressed in the next 3 years?
It looks like the holders of the debt and the buyers of the debt will not buy enough to meet the supply, and as a result, interest rates will rise. As those interest rates rise, that has an effect, of course, on the economy and so on, but it begins real problems, particularly when asset prices are now fairly expensive, and so you have that dynamic taking place. The central bank then is put into a position, does it print money and buy that shortfall? And when it does that, then there is the depreciation of the value of money that produces a monetary inflation. In any case, there is a movement from this treasury market, which is the backbone of our whole financial system, to be, there is a trauma in that, and then that affects all markets, and then money as a storehold of wealth as we know it is in jeopardy. Is not in jeopardy, it's depreciated. So there's an issue of debt is money, money is debt, and if you have a supply-demand problem,
yes,
and it's not good to hold that asset, you're going to have the selling of that asset, and you're going to have that kind of spiral. And we needn't do this. Okay, it's alert, but the existing, I'll speak of the United States, but a number of countries face this issue. The United States will run a deficit of about 7.5% of GDP if the Trump tax cuts are continued, which I expect. And that deficit needs to be cut to 3% of GDP, must be cut to 3% of GDP. All policymakers and the president should have a pledge to get it to 3% of GDP, because otherwise we're likely to have a problem. And that can be done.
Sure, but I mean, you're talking about a pretty compressed timeline. I think most Americans are thinking this is in the distant future. You're saying it's imminent if it's not addressed.
It looks like, the way I penciled these numbers out, it looks like it's a 3-year type of timeline, and you also have to do the adjustment, the cutbacks, and make that adjustment. You have to do it when things are relatively good, and you have to do it promptly, because otherwise the debt accumulates and the debt problem gets worse. It's like if I'm speaking with you about your heart. I'm a doctor, and I'm talking with you, and I'm saying, okay, Tucker, you have this situation. Okay, the plaque is there. You're in a high risk of this heart attack, essentially. Now, what are you going to do about it? Here are the things. Maybe it's exercise, maybe it's this and that, but in one way or another, you've got to do this now, because you're in better health now. Don't wait for this to happen and then try to make it better.
What's striking about your diagnosis, though, is when I hear that, I'm thinking, well, in my 80s, I will address this. You're saying I do it by summer vacation or I die. So we have a new administration in the United States. And they are setting about, very famously over the last 3 weeks, cutting a lot of wasteful spending. The DOGE project under Elon appears to have the full support of the president. If they were sitting here, what would you say that they need to do within the next year to address the crisis you think is right around the corner?
There are many ways to get the number down to 3% of GDP. So you've got to have, and there's a lot of politics about that.
Well, yeah.
But everybody should say, whatever way you get there, you've got to get there, okay? So now the question is, are the cost cuts going to actually be able to produce that? You have to take sharp pencils, and you also have to think, what are you going to break along the way? Because you don't want to break too many things along the way, but you've got to do it fast. So, how much is cost cuts? How much is interest rates? Interest rates are an important influence on the debt because we're paying so much in interest rates. So how do you affect the interest rates? If you do this, you'll improve the supply-demand picture, and you'll have lower interest rates, which will contribute. So I think you have to say, you have to deliver. How much can you deliver from each of those things without breaking too many things that are going to be problematic? And we can go down, if I was then having that conversation, you can go back to the items. Don't let the ideological aspects of this be so much that you don't achieve the goal.
So can you give us a couple of examples? I mean, I think the idea, which some say is a fantasy, is that you could get to 3% through cutting discretionary spending, wasteful nonsense, et cetera. But it doesn't sound like that's correct.
You know, that I don't see it.
Yes.
Okay. But it gets down to the particulars. If you can go through and say, I'm not going to unacceptably break these things and I'm going to achieve those things, and that's the case, great. And then there is truth in the fact that new technologies are going to bring about efficiency.
Yes.
And if quick enough we make increases in income and increases in productivity, there are benefits to be had from those things too.
Yes.
Okay. But there is an unknown factor there, and it looks to me like each one of those having enough effect in a quick enough period of time is unlikely, or or if you want to do it, I would say, then recognize that you're responsible for the consequences. And if you don't pull this off and there's a problem, that you own it.
Having seen this in smaller countries a couple of times, I wonder if in the United States we ignore the effect of these questions on stability. I mean, what you're really doing is rewriting the social contract when you make certain cuts. Like, people expect, the government's going to do X, Y, and Z for me, and all of a sudden the government says I'm not going to, and then you get political volatility up to and including, violence. This has happened in many, many countries. So is it scarier to you, the debt crisis that you described that's right on the horizon, or the potential blowback from making cuts that, the population really doesn't want?
I think the question is how tolerable it is. I think we are at this big risk thing, and a lot of decisions have got to be made quick.
Yes.
And so you've got to go ahead and be right and make those decisions, and then you find out what's tolerable. I think that probably since achieving that must be of paramount importance, then you do it, and that's the best thing that you can do.
Make the decision.
Go do it. Get the 3%. And you can do it if you realize there are three factors. There's taxes, which I say taxes, not tax rates, tax income, which also comes from it.
Of course.
From the fact that if the world is earning more, there will be more tax income. Okay, so there's taxes. There's spending. Cut the spending in various ways. Cut it down as far as you can. And that becomes tolerable. And then there's interest rates. And if you do the first two, you will have lower interest rates. This magnitude of change, which is roughly a 4 to 5% change in GDP, a fiscal tightening of 4 or 5% in GDP, happened between 1992 and 1998.
Right.
So it's been doable. If you get that mix right, you don't create too much shock in any one of those, it's achievable. But it has to be done now.
So, not to blame anyone or look backward or anything, but when historians assess, like, the 100-year period that we're living through right now, how important will they weight the dramatic drop in interest rates, the price of money, after the financial crisis? We had this long period where money was super cheap. Are the problems that we're dealing with now the direct result of that, do you think?
Yeah, there were two big surges. Well, let me say, since 1944, there was a healthy period where debt taken on produced enough income to service the debt.
Right.
That's good. That's healthy.
Yes.
That's not a problem. Everybody benefits from that. Then we got into a period of time through these various cycles that more debt got taken on than incomes. And so when you need income to service the debt. And so that rose for a long time. And the crescendo of that took place in the two big fiscal stimulations that took place first in the COVID and second in what was a big transfer of wealth where the government borrowed a lot of money, send out checks, and then we had the rise in inflation. Oh, surprise, you send out all these checks.
You weren't surprised?
Of course not. You send out all this money to everybody, what are you going to...
The Treasury Secretary seemed completely shocked by it. Like, really?
I mean, it's basic, okay?
Yeah.
So, okay, now we are where we are in that thought. And that's not just the U.S., okay? That's the world,
yes.
Okay? So what I'm talking about is that it's a world problem, it's a China problem, it's a Europe problem, it's a world debt problem. But I want to go back to my also 5. That means it's an internal political problem, okay? Because if you have that problem, that debt problem, you exacerbate the great conflict that's going to happen.
Yes.
You create political instability. It's a geopolitical problem, a debt situation at the same time as there are conflicts internationally, geopolitical. Climate is costly. Roughly $8 trillion a year on climate. So it's a financial thing. And now the question is this new technology and how we're going to handle that and what, how do we make the most to raise productivity, or what is it used for? Is it used for conflict?
I sincerely think we could go to dinner and everybody in this room would be much smarter. But we only have a couple of minutes left. So if I could just connect 1 and 2 just for a second. So what you're describing, the need to get to 3% of GDP, okay, like now, I'm wondering if you can do that. I'm speaking specifically of the United States with the system that we currently have. It feels like if all the 5 factors are connected, they're all converging at once in this 80-year cycle. I mean, is our current political system, or the one that we had, the first week of November of last year, is that the system that is going to allow this level of change?
I think the administration, but there's the United States, there's Europe,
yes.
There's all of these places that are facing the same issue,
yes.
Okay? So it's difficult to speak that. I think the administration is going to be dealing with this more, and then the question is, okay, how practical is it in terms of achieving those things? And then also, can everybody take the 3% pledge? Like I think if we all could get together and everybody says, I'll own it, I'm in government, I'll own it. And then find out also, like a backup solution, if you were to basically say, if we can't agree on everything, we'll do it proportionately across everything. Something, but it has to be done. Otherwise, Tucker, it's like the heart attack thing,
A lot of people have heart attacks.
A lot of them are
because they can't face it.
A lot of them are preventable.
Yeah, of course, but they happen anyway because people just don't want to deal with it, or they think it's going to happen in 20 years, but it happens in 20 minutes.
I think as we step back, the important thing is that we don't just react to how we feel. Like we feel good in the moment right now. There's a lot to make us feel good in this moment.
Yes.
Okay? And that we pay attention and realize the mechanics. So that's why I wrote, and anybody who is interested, I wrote a piece online that'll be a book. It's called How Countries Go Broke, and it shows the mechanics of the process. And numbers, and shows, okay, here's the debt service, here's what it's like, here's the supply, demand, and all of that. It's online, it's free, and what I'm trying to have people do is say, is that true analytically? Is that right? Or what is wrong with it? Yes. And then if you embrace that, is it right? If it is right, what does that mean if you're a bondholder or a government or whatever, be aware, study it, and then deal with it.
Last 30-second question. If we're here 4 years from now, you're describing a world that's changing even faster maybe than most of us think it is. How different do you expect the entire global landscape to be in 4 years?
I think we're going through a time warp. That you are going to see not only the debt, the internal, the external changes, the changing world order as we're talking about, the changes in technology and what that's going to mean for our lives, artificial intelligence and so on. That is it's almost going to be like going through a time warp, and we're going to be in a whole different world. It's going to be shockingly different in that time frame.
I'm moving to Greenland, which thankful we will own by then. So I'm going to miss a lot of that. But Ray Dalio, thank you very much.
Thank you, too.
I appreciate it.
الحضور الكريم، نستكمل باقي الجلسات في هذه القاعة.
And when we eat different, it's the biggest impact for the planet.
Talk to me about the numbers. I'm a journalist, I love facts and figures. What evidence do you have that the younger generation are adopting a more sustainable approach to food and a vegan diet at something like Oktoberfest? How did the sales break down for traditional meats to vegan products?
So in the younger generation, it's up to 40% on the Oktoberfest. They eat I think Hofbräu, knows Oktoberfest, the big tent, and they sell 30,000 sausages in vegan, you know, and that's the best communicator you have, to try the product, to try this burger from Green Force, and then it's tasty, and the product's getting even better, you know, and it's all about the taste, you know.
What does it taste like? Could we do the Pepsi challenge, as they say? Would we be able to taste the difference in a blindfold test?
So, for example, I had this right now, it was 2 weeks ago. We have the first vegan cheese. The vegan cheese is amazing, or not? We have not tropical oils inside, it's almond. And we tried it on one of the marketplaces in Munich. And from 100 people, nobody see the difference to real cheese. So, and this is what our branch right now is too. We are, I think we need 1 to 2 years, then the products are more healthier, and you can compare it to the meat. It's the future.
It's the future. In terms of the future here in the United Arab Emirates, what is next on the horizon? How are you developing here with your partners?
Yes, first of all, our partner is Silal and ADQ, and Silal, they have one of the biggest food distributors here in the country, Safco, and now we are in over 150 hotels, restaurant chains, and now we start first to bring the products to the market, not in the supermarkets, that will be the next step.
When will that be?
I hope next year.
Okay,
next year.
We'll hold you to that.
And and the government come to us and said, Thomas, come please with your idea, with the powder, no cooling chain, long shelf time for 2.5 years. It's fantastic for the kids also. That's the food, no artificial things inside, full of pea protein, and I think that's very important. The pea protein has every 20 amino acids, what the body needs, and you know, it's so important. Our daughter is 14 years old, and I think this generation, they eat different, they think different, and when we can do something for the environment and also for the kids, for the health of the future, I think it's the best
They
what
like
we
it.
can do.
It's a
And this
win-win.
is why I have so much power behind Greenforce, because I love the idea to do something what's maybe a little bit a game changer for the next generation.
Interesting. When I do go shopping at the supermarkets here next year, and I will hold you to that, how much will I be paying for a packet like this? Because people are price conscious.
I know.
And we need to be able to feed our children and fill our tummies, but do it economically. So how do you compare to traditional meat products?
Okay, in Germany, because in Germany now we are in the mass market of plant-based food. So it's the same price than the meat. And also why? Because we have a powder and it's so much cheaper. We have no food waste. We can give this money, what we not spend on raw materials, on food waste, we can give it directly to the customer. So our product, the powder solution, is 80% cheaper than the vegan products in the US market. So, and for example, in Germany, when you buy our burgers, so we have also fresh products in the shelf, by the biggest supermarket chains. We are placed in 15,000 supermarkets in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the price is €2.99. So it's in euros. I don't know. Maybe you can.
€2.99.
€2.99.
It's about 10 dirhams, really. Is
10
that
dirhams,
cheap?
yeah, 10 dirhams.
Okay. Just lastly, and we have very little time on the clock, but the biggest challenge, what concerns you, what keeps you awake at night in terms of the future of Greenforce? Is it winning hearts and minds, or is it something else?
The biggest challenge is that everyone wants to think different, because when you understand that the biggest impact what you can do is to eat different for the environment. But you know, the older generation, they have to be open-minded. The younger generation, yeah, and so I have to speak a lot of conferences that you all guys here in that room, please eat once or twice plant-based, and then it's a game changer for the next generation. And we need everyone on this vision. It's not only about Greenforce. All the competitors, these on the market, and when you see the studies worldwide, one is sure, so the next generation, I think they will eat not 80% vegan, but 50%. And then it's a fantastic solution.
Let's do one more straw poll.
Yeah.
Who will try vegan once a week? Me too.
Good, perfect.
I think you have your answer. Thomas Usserman, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, please. Much food for thought, ladies and gentlemen. A fantastic first interview for our session here today at the Climate Adaptability and Energy track. Moving swiftly on, we turn our focus now to fusion energy. Are we unlocking the power of the stars? Here to tell us more is Robert Mumgaard, the CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems. Please welcome him.
Thank you very much. I'm here to talk about something very different. I'm here to talk about the power of the stars, fusion energy. So first, let's set some context. I'm a MIT PhD. I love graphs. So this is a graph that's one of my favorites. This is the worldwide energy, clean electricity demand projections. And there's really three things that you need to know about this graph. One, the x-axis is in decades. This is a giant macro trend over the better part of the next century. The y-axis is in gigawatts. Gigawatts are just gigadollars. This is tens of thousands of, this is on order $100 trillion transition. The different curves are different projections by different organizations whose job is to project these things. And they disagree by a factor of at least 3. And they basically disagree based on how techno-optimist they are. Are we going to meet our climate demands, our climate requirements? And what is the demand impact of things like AI? So here we have a $1 trillion change over decades, and we don't really know how it's going to go, but we know we need new technologies. That's the type of thing that you want to get involved in and go out and try to invent those types of technologies. Well, it turns out that in energy, the universe has already picked a solution. So 99.999% of all the energy in the universe is actually made through this process called fusion. It's the process that's inside of all the stars. It's the process that built every single atom. in the fusion process, the lightest elements get combined together, and they make heavier ones. And in that process, they take a tiny bit of mass and they turn it into energy. E equals mc squared, it's a lot of energy. This is the opposite process to traditional nuclear power, where we take heavy elements and split them. It's a completely different process. If we were to make this process work on Earth, it would mean that you could make energy from basically no fuel. The fuel is elements of water. It's available to everybody. You could make this in a machine that sat there and made energy continuously, a machine that you could build and put it in a power plant, a machine that would make heat, and you would convert the heat to electricity. So at the heart of this is this process that is at the cutting edge of what science can do, built into a machine, something you have to manufacture, put into a plant. And the world is right now at the cusp of being able to do those three things. What these would look like as power plants is you would go and you would make a new class of power device. These would be plants that would be like the order of building a natural gas power plant or building a coal power plant. So these are centralized utilities that you would install potentially where you already had fossil fuel assets. On this picture is our version of that. This is a type of machine. It's called a tokamak. And the world's actually built about 150 of these, but all for scientific research. They haven't yet reached the point where they can actually make power. In our case, this would be about 400 megawatts of electricity. 400 megawatts is enough to power a town. You would need to have on order a few dozen of these to, say, power Dubai. That's similar to how we power Dubai today. These types of power plants are things that could be incredibly sustainable. So when you think about being able to run a power plant with basically no inputs and no emissions, so that's a pretty incredible thing, but that's exactly what the sun does. The sun sits there and it runs for 1 billion years. It doesn't take inputs and it doesn't really have outputs. And if you built a machine that basically had a star inside of it, that's what you would have for your power source. This would happen without the long-lived nuclear waste. So there's no chain reaction, there's no uranium, there's no plutonium. So that's why many people think that the fusion energy systems are sort of the holy grail of energy. Additionally, when you think about the ability to scale such an energy system, that becomes primarily a manufacturing exercise. It becomes how do you build these machines fast enough? When you build the machine, you go and you install it, it makes energy, it doesn't consume resources. And you start to look at what the installed footprint would be for building out an industry, a fusion industry, and it's similar to the types of industries we already do today. So factories that make cars, factories that make ships. And so that means this could scale. And it could scale at the rate that would be needed to meet those curves I showed earlier. And that's a really big deal because it gives you a new option for how to both meet the demand growth for energy, where energy is needed around the world for people that don't have it, while also doing it in a clean way, a way that doesn't produce carbon emissions. So we've been developing this at Commonwealth Fusion Systems. What are we? So Commonwealth Fusion Systems is the largest private fusion company. It's just over 1,000 employees and about $2 billion of capital that's been invested on the plan to be able to build the first generation of these fusion power plants in the near term. How near? Like in the early 2030s. It's backed by investors that include Bill Gates and Breakthrough Energy Ventures and also large energy companies like Eni and Equinor and sovereign wealth funds like Temasek. It's a spin-out of MIT based on research that has come from the worldwide fusion community over the last 3 decades. And what we're doing is we're taking that science and these types of machines, we're developing new technology to make these machines faster and higher performing to build, and we're building a demonstration machine, the one in the middle we call Spark. And then that would lead on to the power plant I showed earlier on the right called ARC. We're able to do this now, today, because the science about how to make that reaction go is increasingly well understood. About 2 years ago, a lab in California demonstrated that reaction, the fusion reaction, at a performance level that made more power out than in for the first time ever. This was a really big achievement in the history of humanity. And this is a bunch of data on the right. I'm not going to go through the details. But these are all machines that have been built around the world that are going up to the right. They're getting higher and higher performance. So we're getting to the point now where we can predict how these machines work, we can build them, and we can reach the levels of power production and more power out than in that is needed to think about a commercialization effort. So the science is at the cusp. And now the step is to actually build it into industrial scale demonstrated facilities. This is one such facility. This is our facility, Spark. This is about an hour outside of Boston at previously it was an Army base. And this is a prototype of a fusion power plant. In the middle of this facility is where the actual machine is assembled. And then around it are all the different industrial scale facilities that make that power plant run. And we started to build this about 3 years ago. We took an empty site. Here's a picture of the site. Took an empty site and started to build what is the most advanced energy project in the world. So everything you see here is built in the last 3 years, designed by our company. Our company comes from people that used to build planes and rockets and submarines. And we have built a supply chain that has developed all these technologies that can make the fusion machines do what we want them to do. And we're in the middle of putting all this together in Devens, Massachusetts. We're about halfway through this process. This picture here is where we'll actually assemble that machine. That assembly is actually getting started this month. And in about 2 years, we'll turn this on. And so in 2027, what we'll have is we'll have a prototype fusion demonstration facility that's about 100 megawatts, so size of a small gas turbine, that will push a button and will make more power out than in from a star in a bottle using a whole stack of advanced technologies, which will be very, very exciting. This is enabled because of these technologies that relate to how you build these effectively magnetic bottles. So this machine itself uses very, very strong magnetic fields that use a type of material, won the Nobel Prize in the 1980s, and has been commercialized over the last 20 years. When I said earlier that you could think about fusion as an energy source that you manufacture, here's actually the inside of the factory at Commonwealth Fusion Systems that does that manufacturing. And so in this factory, which is on the same site and built on the same timeline, we have teams that are working around the clock that are putting together the actual fusion components. These are made out of traditional types of materials, metal, welding, things that you could picture doing at scale. It's all in the right configuration, very well thought through about exactly what all the different parts must do, but there's nothing in this facility that you couldn't replicate around the world, that you couldn't build over and over again. And this particular facility makes magnets that are superconducting, meaning they don't use any power, but they're very, very strong magnets. They're magnets that are about 20 times the performance of an MRI machine. And we use those magnets to contain the very, very hot fusion conditions inside our tokamaks. And this is technology that was only about 4 years ago thought to be 20 years away. And so this is part of an accelerating cycle where you're taking technologies that are from adjacent areas and you're rapidly putting them into the fusion application and accelerating it. And so about 2 years ago, we demonstrated the first of these magnets, and that was hand-built. That was built with a small team. And now it's being made at industrial scale in a factory setting. And in the next 2 years, we'll turn all these into the Spark tokamak and turn it on. And now that leads to what happens after the Spark machine. So the Spark machine is a demonstration machine. It's a machine that's designed to show an integrated capability set, that people working together can actually make these reactions happen on Earth in a replicable way. And that's great. That's the end of the scientific journey for the first generation of power plants, but it's not yet a commercial power plant. And so what we announced last December is we announced the site for the first commercial scale fusion power plant. That's this site here outside of Richmond, Virginia, just south of Washington, D.C. This is a site that's in partnership with Dominion, a major U.S. utility, to actually put a fusion power plant on the grid. This is part of the United States' goal to actually have the first fusion power plant running by 2032, which is a very aggressive goal, but a goal that's now been mirrored by many nations around the world. A goal that's similar been announced in the UK and Japan. And we have various initiatives that are happening in China, India, and other places that indicate that we're at the beginning of a new type of space race, a new race for a technology around fusion, a new race for energy. And so this site will be the US, we believe, and our company, will be the first instance in the United States of a grid-connected fusion power plant. It'll sell its power onto the grid, probably to help power things like advanced manufacturing and artificial intelligence models. In terms of timing, this is a site that we'll start the construction on, hopefully in around the 2027 timeframe. Right now, we're in the phases of figuring out exactly what the design should be, how we should install it, how we interconnect it, et cetera, what the regulatory structure is. That has to be sorted out for fusion in many places. It's been sorted in the US and the UK. And then that'll put this in line to turn on and operate in the sort of 2031, 2032 timeframe is what we're hoping for. So this is the next phase of our company's evolution, but also of fusion energy. And this really opens up an era where we like to think about energy without constraints. So if you think about what you have in a fusion system, you've got this system that is a completely new way to generate power. It hasn't really happened since we first split the atom in the 1950s, and before that hadn't happened until Edison in the first power plants in the turn of the century. In this case, though, with fusion, it's an energy system that will never run out. It's an energy system that literally the fuel on the planet will last us longer than the planet. And that opens up a new way to really think about energy. And what does it mean to lead in energy? What does it mean to develop energy and deploy it? When energy ceases to be about consuming natural resources and finding and gathering them, and becomes about building technology. And that's a very, very hopeful view of the world. And it's one that today, there's now thousands of people at companies, there's over 50 fusion companies, with governments that are in a race to make that a reality. So I'm excited to be here to share that and watch where this field's going over the next 7 or 8 years. Thank you.
Teachers essentially is education, which I think really at one fundamental level is developing critical thinking skills and a healthy level of skepticism amongst individuals when they're consuming information. There is a huge amount of reflexivity to what you're getting out of an LLM and then what you're then projecting out into the world. So I think training young minds to be somewhat skeptical and understanding how these models work and how information is disseminated, I think that's going to be critically important in the years ahead.
That's great. Well, I just kind of, as we're wrapping up, there's a lot, of course, to digest here. We don't want to be doom and gloom. I think the reality is AI is moving faster than almost anyone had predicted. The impact it's having on society, you look at ChatGPT, the fastest application ever get to 100 million users, will be the fastest to get to 1 billion users. And of course, it's proliferating our everyday life. So, I think it's something that, as a go forward, I think we all need to be really cognizant of, to what extent we participate in this. Of course, everyone is, friends of ours are in the White House at the moment, trying to figure out what the right paradigm is and what the right safety measures and right controls are. But this needs to be a dialogue amongst everyone, because not only is we talking about the future state where LLMs and artificial intelligence more generally are the thing that is controlling much of the world and is responsible, as Elon had said this morning, for 99% of intelligence in the world. But beyond that, we have the real world implications of we have children, and those children are learning from these models today, and we want to make sure that what they learn is consistent with what we believe. So I think he said it really well. He posed the question, what values do you teach your child? AI is our child right now. Very soon, AI will be a very, very powerful child, but that's the question we should leave. We should really be thinking about. And I think with that, I think we'll wrap up and leave you for the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bring the water. One water. And one glass. Okay, let's go.
Okay, excellent. Just like Billy at the start, I could have listened to those to Diego and Michael for a long period of time, but we only have 20 minutes each. We only have one more 20-minute discussion before we wrap up this section. But again, it's going to be a great discussion. We are going to focus on the how. How can governments strengthen digital resilience? I'm going to be joined by two leading experts in this space. First, Sheikh Salman bin Mohammed Al Khalifa, who's the CEO at the National Cybersecurity Centre from the Kingdom of Bahrain. And also joining us will be Mohammed Al Zarouni, Deputy Director General at the Information and Digital Government Sector here at the UAE. So please join me in welcoming Salman and Mohammed to the stage. Thank you, everyone. Okay, excellent, excellent, excellent. How can governments strengthen digital resilience? So there's a lot to talk about, and we only have 20 minutes. But Mohammed, maybe I can start with you. I want to start with the why. Why is digital resilience important for governments?
Well, first of all, I feel very honored to be here with you and accompanying Sheikh Salman with this very important topic. And if I would answer this question, I'll start by an incident where you wake up morning and you find thousands of businesses are shutting down, hundreds of flights got cancelled, and maybe hundreds of critical services such as healthcare, education, banking, they go offline. This is exactly what happened in July 2024 last year, when a failing software update ended up with crashing 8.5 million machines worldwide. So this is a wake-up call for all of us, not only within the UAE, but worldwide, that such incident should emphasize on the importance of digital resiliency and being ready for such incident. We cannot afford to have such incident again, which cost the world more than $5 billion as a direct loss. So, especially for those nations who are actually putting the digital economy and their ambition to increase the GDP contribution. For example, the UAE has decided to double up the GDP contribution of the digital economy within the economy by from 9.7 to almost 19.4 in the next decade. So putting the digital resiliency part of their endeavor to reach such a journey, it's crucial.
And Mohammed, what's interesting about that is if you increase that percentage of the UAE economy, that's exciting because we all rely on our digital technologies and et cetera. But it also means it's vulnerable, like it has to be protected, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Someone, can I bring you in here? Just to start on the why. I want to get to the what and the how a bit later, but someone, why? Why is this so important?
I mean, you just need to look at all the sessions that we've been through, and we hear one statement: digital transformation, AI, and this is the next frontier, and this is now the reality that we live in. Governments have changed their services to electronics, banking has gone digital. No one wants to go to a desk and transact traditionally how they used to. So we need to have the utmost trust in these services. If that trust does not exist, then we cannot interact with that. So that is, we need to maintain as governments that trust and ensure that citizens use those services so that we can better their lives and make, give them more time to spend with their families. So ensuring that there is resiliency in our cyber services and our digital transformation is the utmost importance, because it allows the country to be more efficient, adapt greater technologies such as robotics. Everything's going to be on Industry 4.0. If technology is not trusted, if tech manufacturing is not done correctly, if there is insecurity in our smart cities, how will we have driverless cars? So this not done right will lead to a delay in adoption of these technologies and delay in the development of our society. So I think resiliency needs to play a greater role and should play a greater role in our digital transformation.
Simon, this is so interesting because the 3 sessions that I've been involved with over the last 30 to 40 minutes, there's versions of trust. We talked to Billy half an hour ago, and we're going to need to build trust with civil society as those amazing technologies come to market. Diego and Michael just talked about trust and information and those. And again, here we are from a more sort of maybe public sector, government sector. Civil society needs to trust in these services. That my banking information is not going to be lost, or my access to healthcare is not going to be lost, that Mohammed mentioned earlier. But I mean, this is absolutely fascinating to me that as we drive these digital technologies forward, we also need to bring in trust or ensure trust. But Simon, that brings me to the how. We know the why. Hopefully the why is clear for everyone. But before I come back to Mohammed, how do we do this?
I mean, so it's quite simple. It's not really nuclear science. If you look at banking sector, healthcare, the banking sector now has audit reports that they need to go back to the central banks, where they can show the central bank that you can trust that we are handling the citizens' money in the right way and we're not putting finance at risk. All we need to do is have the right standards in place and ensure they are audited and delivered to a central authority, whether we leverage the same regulator at a sector level, say the central banks checks the financial health of the bank and checks the cyber health, or you can create a special vehicle. As long as we come up with a standard that is achievable, that is compliable, then we can elevate our cyber readiness. We don't need to achieve 1 to 100. Don't forget, industry right now, you cannot expect a bank to be the same par as the healthcare sector. Sometimes healthcare sectors are at an earlier stage, where you find banking sector is more resilient. So you need to come up with a maturity model. What I mean by a maturity model is that you can say, well, banks, you need to be at level, say, 3. Healthcare sectors or other small industries need to be at level 1. Why do we do that? We need to slowly push that line of security. There is an understanding in the cyberspace where you can say, if you implement just 20% of those controls, those standards, you can elevate your cyber resiliency by up to 80%. It is literally an exponential curve.
Right.
But it becomes significantly more difficult as you go along. What does it say? It says that you don't really need to be 100%, but you just made life so much more difficult that that attacker will move somewhere else. But you need to keep pushing, moving up that maturity model. Keep pushing that sector go up and up and up, because as the previous group has said, we're going to have AI coming to the picture. AI is now going to lower that barrier of an attack. It used to take so much knowledge, so much capability to be able to, to have that attack happen. What happens now with AI is that bar has just gone down and the volume will get to increase. And so we need to quickly move up that pace.
Right. That's a tremendous challenge. I really admire what both of you are up to, because this sounds very, very difficult. But Mohammed, coming to you on the how, I mean, how should we be doing this, increasing this digital resilience for governments?
Well, I mean, before I joined this session, I was looking for the right definition of digital resilience. So all the definition was actually going towards the ability for governments or agencies to intercept or anticipate, withstand and recover from digital disruption caused by either cyber attacks or system failures or technological shift. But I believe this definition by itself focuses on the risk. It doesn't talk about the opportunities. If we're talking about digital resilience, means that you are ready to absorb and to be ready for the future, to become your digital economy more robust and accept more innovation, and making your country and your nation a hub where all the digital innovators join you. So if we look at how, I think that government has to look at it from a very holistic point of view, taking into consideration two lenses. One is the risk, which is very obvious, and the other one, which is the opportunities. So I can summarize the digital resiliency framework in the infrastructure, not for today, but for the next decade, in order to be ready for either the good day or the bad days. The good days means that there are an opportunity, as we are witnessing the demand of AI, which is happening in an accelerated way. Are we ready for infrastructure? Is the infrastructure ready to accommodate this one? And it's not only about the network, the telecom operators, which they are doing a good job here in the UAE, but I believe that all pillars of infrastructure has to be ready and has to be scalable enough to respond to these days. For example, the ability to secure the power required for the data centers to operate and provide the good services. The ability to, the commitment from the governments to allocate enough lands for those data centers to thrive and grow within the country. So this is from infrastructure point of view. And I can give an example of how it paid off when the pandemic came in suddenly to the world. Those agencies and those countries who invested in infrastructure were ready enough to accommodate everyone online, and the life never stopped. In the UAE, for example, we have managed to shift 1 million students from physical learning into online learning, thanks to the infrastructure which is there. That's the infrastructure point of view. I don't want to go further on it. From technology point of view, as Sheikh Salman mentioned, that with the advancement of AI can be used for good and bad. So the complexity of the attacks in terms of magnitude and in terms of the sophistication has to be treated in different way. The conventional way of having a very low-end technology system won't help. So we need to think about bringing up the next generation technologies and software to mitigate a different type of cybersecurity risk. And at the same time, we have to think about encouraging our partners, worldwide partners, like for example, the cloud computing hyperscalers to come to the country and establish their presence there. And I believe that UAE and Bahrain is a good role model for the region as a welcoming countries to attract those things. Many of the hyperscalers, they are actually exist here, and they help the government and they help the private sectors to have a good digital presence. The third part, which is policies and regulation, there are different policies and regulation has to be there. One of them is combating e-crime, because you need to criminalize the bad acts. At the same time, there are other policies which are available to spread the culture of being a digital resilience. For example, the cabinet recently introduced, the cabinet of UAE recently introduced a service level policy, where they are actually pushing and urging government agencies to make their service as good as private sector services in terms of availability, 24/7, latencies, performance. So this is a move where I believe that it helped the community at large understand the importance of being a digital nation.
Right.
The third important, or the fourth pillar, which is the people. I can bet on that in the cybersecurity or digital resilience era, always the demand of experts exceed the supply. That's a fact that we have to...
And when you say people, do you mean people within the government sector, or is this people in civil society relating to government services?
I believe both.
Right.
And I believe even the end user who are actually using digital services, because the end user might be the weakest link in the chain. If they are not aware of the risk of cybersecurities and digital resilience, they might end up with being in a bad situation, being hacked or compromised. So the people has to be looked at in with very cautious, and a lot of capacity building program has to be done to uplift their capability when it comes to dealing with the digital resilience. The last thing, I think it's about digital cooperation on the international level, because unfortunately, or fortunately sometimes, these risks are borderless.
Right.
So we should not think about that there is only a target within a country, but it's spread out different countries. Without having the digital cooperation into that matter, the life will be much difficult for us.
That's a perfect segue, because I actually want to ask someone exactly the same question, the importance of international cooperation. I mean, we can't do, like, I imagine we can't do these things on our own. There's no point having one country just focus on themselves, but Salman, how important is this international cooperation across borders?
I think cybersecurity centers, by their very nature, are in constant state of sharing threat intelligence, best practices, and we're constantly learning of each other. So, I mean, we were late in the game in Bahrain, and we had to learn from our colleagues across the nation, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and that kind of global cooperation, even internationally, allowed us to quickly ramp up our abilities. So without the help of our colleagues, it would have taken us a lot longer. So last year, Bahrain was ranked in the late 60s in the global readiness. But with the partnership of our partners, we've learned the tricks, things that we need to do, that allowed us to quickly ramp up our ranking to being leaders with our colleagues of the UAE. That kind of cooperation is the sharing of knowledge, sharing of tools, sharing of information and skills that allow us to quickly ramp up our abilities. Now, that goes without saying. Without skills, you don't know what to do with that. So I think even cooperating on capacity building at international level is of vital importance. So, and bringing that in country so that you can avoid the challenges that the globe is facing right now. Because to me, one of the most important elements to have in a country is competency. Without competency, we will be in a difficult situation.
And is that, again, sort of people within the government departments, or where is that most important?
No, I mean, I think you look at individuals.
Yep.
So IT people in general,
right,
need to be in the private sector and the public sector competent in not only IT and in cybersecurity. It is not cybersecurity's responsibility to fix things. It's a shared responsibility model. So, take for the developer. The developers need to be competent enough to develop code that is secure. The infrastructure people need to be aware and understand what to do from a cybersecurity perspective. And the same thing from the networking. So it is a shared responsibility model. So every single group needs to be capable, and you build that. So you inherit people that are in the, working currently, and you need to upskill them, and you want to embed that at universities. So the people who graduate, our young students, are ready from day one. So the developers that come out of university understand how to code securely. The infrastructure people who are going to be the DB admins, the infrastructure. Now we're moving away from that terminology to DevOpsSec, and that is where the world is heading. This is where it should be, and it's the most efficient mechanism to quickly develop applications.
Interesting. Mohammed, in the last minute or so, we talked yesterday as we were catching up, there are so many stakeholders here, at the government level, at the private sector. I imagine communication is so important for both of you, working with all your colleagues in these different areas, just communicating and making sure everyone understands the importance. Is that a fair assumption to make?
It is. I believe that without having communication, especially when it comes to responding to incident, things will be very vague, and we won't be able to help our colleagues when they are in trouble. And this kind of communication is happening at the country level, and sometimes we need to also cooperate hand in hand with our colleagues and brothers in the GCC. And this is evidenced by the GCC CERT, where a lot of activities happening, initiative happening to foster the collaboration between us on the region. We are sharing our threat intelligence together, and this is very important for the welfare of the region, but also we are part of other regional or maybe bigger organizations responsible for cybersecurity, mitigating cybersecurity, like the OAC CERT and the FIRST, which is the Forum for Incident Response and Security Teams in the United States. So the cybersecurity, if I can summarize it, that it's not a one country problem, it's the world problem. So we have to work hand in hand with our peers and everywhere to mitigate it, because it's good for everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, actually, as the clock just went 0, I think that was a perfect place to finish and a great sort of sentiment to finish on. I just want to draw this hour to a close. For me, these sessions have been fantastic with Diego, Michael, Billy, Salman and Mohammed here. But what I think trust seems to be so important. We've all got different angles on digital resilience and resilient governments. But in the 3 sessions I heard, trust is going to be so important. Trust within government departments, trust with partners, international community, and also trust with civil society. And that communication point there at the end that Mohammed really makes. But that draws our hour to a close. Thank you so much for joining us, and please join me in thanking Mohammed and Salman for sharing their experience.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our next panel discussion is titled, Can Culture Revive a City in Crisis? This session is moderated by Becky Anderson from CNN. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel.